In the last video, we improved security by consoling into the router, and I'm just going to emulate that by clicking on the router and going to the command line tab. And what we set up was usernames and passwords. So now, instead of just a global login, I need to type my username, and then I type my password, and I can get into the router. Now to do that was pretty easy. All we had to do was go into enable privileged mode. I have a password for that too. Alright, and let's see here. I had to go into global config mode, which was configure terminal, and then from there you could set up a username, let's say like this could be somebody else like David, right? And then a secret MD5 encrypted password by just putting the password in just like that, right? And that puts a user and their password, right? That's the password, that's the username, into a local database right on the router. Now let's see if we can improve that. So to improve that, what we're going to do is we're going to require passwords minimum length of 10 characters. This is what Cisco recommends. In the Academy, CCNA Security, they recommend 10 character minimum length. Letters, numbers, special characters, uppercase, combination, no words, no family members, no birth dates, no recognizable terms. Something that would be easy to look up on somebody, right? And then also we're going to put a timeout within minutes. Now the default timeout when you're logged into the router is 10 minutes, and we can change that. So what we're going to do is we'll say okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in security, and then let's say we don't remember what the rest of the command is. We'll put in a question mark, and you can see the next part of the command is passwords, right? So we'll say passwords, then we'll put a space and a question mark, and then minimum length. So I'll type min tab. There's the full command, security space, password space, minimum length, and then we'll put in 10, right? And so this will affect all users, all passwords created for users after this point. So our two users that are already built into the system are fine. This is only going to affect users from here on out. Okay, and for the exec timeout command to change it, I've made a mistake here. It needs to be done from within line configuration mode. So first you'll have to put in the command, let's say within, so it'll start like this. Let's say you're in global config mode, and you'll say line console 0, right, to go into console 0, and then you'll be in config line mode, and then you'll put in the exec timeout and then the minutes. So let's do that right now. So I'm in global config mode. I type line console 0, right? Now I'm in config line command, and I can type exec tab timeout, and I could say, let's say 3 for 3 minutes, right? And then what I could do is I could do the same thing. I'm going to do a conf tab te tab terminal, go back into global config mode, and do the same thing for the VTY ports 0 through 4. And I could say exec timeout 3 minutes. So now we've set the minimum password length and a timeout, so that from the default of 10 minutes timing out to just 3 minutes of timing out. Another security feature taught in the CCNA security curriculum that's available on some routers, iOS's, is enhanced login features. Now to use enhanced login features, you need to have line VTY configured for Telnet or SSH access, but you have to have it configured with usernames and passwords for the local database, not just one global password, right? So that's what we've done here. We've got line VTY, and we've set up usernames and passwords. So we're using the local database. So we're going to try to use the login block 4 command. So let's give that a try, and I'll explain how that works. All right, I'm going to press return to get started. Put in my password. Okay, put in my enable command. And now I'm in privileged user mode, and I'm going to do this from global config mode. So I'm going to put in conf t for short to get to global config mode. And now what I'm going to try to do is use the login space block-4 command. And the way this works is you'd say login block for, let's say, 180, which would be 180 seconds. So that would block all login attempts to the router for 3 minutes. And then you would put in the number of attempts. Let's see here. So attempts, you would say the attempts that they're allowed are, let's say, 5 attempts, and then within, let's say, 60 seconds. So block for 3 minutes if there's 5 login attempts within 60 seconds, right? And then we'll hit enter, and you can see the command took, so it looks like it worked, right? And what is this good for? Well, this is helpful in case someone is trying to do a dictionary attack on your router, trying to do a brute force attack, let's say trying hundreds and hundreds of different logins and passwords in an attempt to gain access to your router. If it sees 5 failed attempts within 60 seconds, it's going to block all logins to the router for 3 minutes, right? And let's look at the login command here in global config mode and do a question mark. You can see here, I'm going to try to see if we could do the quiet mode. Quiet mode. And it doesn't see it. But there is this is not available on every router, but there are 2 additional modes that you can use that will control how blocking happens for the router. There is, if your iOS supports it, a login normal mode, and there's also a login quiet mode. And the quiet mode will allow the router to block all access to the router except for an access list that you have to establish and write to begin with, which will allow a certain amount of administrative IP addresses access to the router, so that everybody's blocked to the router except for the access list that you set up, those administrators that are allowed on only, let's say, a certain number of IP addresses that you can have access to. And you can log in also with this login. Another advanced feature here is something we can implement. We can't do quiet mode because our router does not support it right now. But one thing that we could do is login question mark. We could set on failure and on success. So let's do that. So we'll say on dash F tab on failure, right? Log. So it's going to log every failed attempt, and we could say, and that's it. CR stands for carriage return, so that's all we have to do is just say on failure log, and we can do an on success log. So that will create a log, which essentially is going to set up some accountability for who logs onto the router and who also fails to log on to the router. So even though our router in this packet tracer only let us use the login block4 command and the login on failure and on success commands, I've written down the other commands that you could do that are talked about in the curriculum, and that is the login quiet mode, which will block all access to the router except for an access list that you set up, which will allow an administrator only access to the router. So you'd see you type in login quiet mode and then apply the access class statement and then the name or the number of the access list. And you can see here I've put permit access in capitals, and that relates down here to the access list, right? So we've IP access list, a standard access list named permit access, so it's a named access list, and then you've permit this IP address and then end, and that's it. So that is a named access list that permits only one IP address. It's applied right here in quiet mode, and that's that. Then another command that you could do is and I've made a typo here, login delay, which will delay for so many seconds between login attempts on the router. The default is 1 second, but you could change it to like every 3 seconds. So only one login attempt is allowed per every 3 seconds or 5 seconds or something like that. And then, as you've already seen before, the login on failure and the login on success commands. Let's see if we can see a few of these things that we set up in action. So click on the router and hit return to get started and put in my username and my password. And you can see here it says login success user source, so it's already logging who's logging in here. It seems that way anyway. And then I'll type enable and password. Now I'm in privileged user mode. I'll type conf t to get to global config mode, and let's try to, we set up a minimum password length. Let's give that a try. So we'll say username Steve, right? And then we'll say secret password is Cisco and hit enter, and we get a message, password too short, must be at least 10 characters. Password not configured correctly or something like that. So what we could do is we'll try that again, and we'll say username C secret Cisco and hit enter, and sure enough that took, right? We can also do a show login command to see, but it has to be done through privileged mode. So we'll do a show login, and we can see here the default login delay of 1 second is applied. No quiet mode access list has been configured. All failed login is logged. All successful login is logged. So quiet mode access has, no quiet mode access list has been configured. So we still might be able to create a quiet mode access list. Router enabled to watch for login attacks. If more than 5 login failures occur in 60 seconds or less, logins will be disabled for 180 seconds. The router is presently in normal mode, so normal mode and quiet mode still might be in effect.